It's time to focus on today's educational issues. Issues that affect you, your kids, community, and your tax dollars. Topics like violence, legislation, special needs, the gifted, curriculum, technology, the parent's role, building self-esteem, and minorities' needs. How do we deal with substance abuse, AIDS, sports, and very importantly, funding?
Welcome to School Talk. I'm Nadja Varney, your host. Why can some people handle some of life's greatest trials with ease, while others just become burdened by even the slightest setback? What are the factors that actually help people bounce back from adversity, while others are just languishing in helplessness and hopelessness? Well, my guest today, Dr. Robert Brooks, says the secret is to capture the power of resilience. I'm happy to welcome back Dr. Brooks, who is a psychologist, former head of psychology at McLean Hospital, professor, teacher at Harvard University, also author of a number of books, has done PBS specials for television, radio, and a much sought-after speaker for conferences, workshops for teachers, parents, and even in the business world. So welcome back, Dr. Brooks.
It's a pleasure to be here. It always is.
Well, it's really an honor and a joy to have you here.
Thank you.
And I hope you noticed that my introductory question came from the jacket of your book, The Power of Resilience. It just captured why we're here and what we're here to discover. So you used to write books mainly about children. Now this book, which I've read and enjoyed, is more, could be for anyone at any place in life.
Right. Well, the first few books I wrote about resilience had to do with how do we help children to be more resilient.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I wanted to focus on adults is at a number of my workshops, parents and teachers and mental health professionals would say, is it difficult to raise or educate kids to be resilient if you yourself don't feel resilient, if you feel insecure? And the quick answer is, it is more difficult if you're feeling insecure to help others to feel more secure and resilient. And then one of the things that really prompted me to want to write this book is, after an all-day workshop I gave for teachers, this lovely teacher raised her hand. I will never forget this moment, and she said, "Bob, I really enjoyed your workshop. You have great ideas. I'm too stressed out to use them." And I laughed as you did. And I said, well, wait a second, if you use these ideas, you'll be less stressed. But I remember early in my career, a time when I was feeling burned out, and I could have heard the most interesting speaker, and I would have sat there and felt the same way. These are interesting ideas, but who has the energy? So I said, you know what? The next book I want to do, I want to focus on our adult lives, not just as parents or teachers, but what do we do to lead more resilient, optimistic lives?
Well, usually people think about resilience. When they hear that word, they think of someone who's overcome some enormous obstacle. But you're not speaking about that, are you?
No, a lot of the research looked at people who have overcome tremendous obstacles. They've been abused, neglected, major losses in their life. But the way we really talk about the concept in our book is resilience applies to everyone, because everyone in each life will experience some challenges, some stresses, and whatever. And so we really broadened the definition beyond what the researchers did and said, look, this concept applies to everyone. And the more we understand what helps people to be more optimistic, more hopeful, then everyone could lead, really, we felt, a more successful life, whether or not they've experienced great adversity or not.
In today's world, that really is good news, because, you know, the incidents of depression and all kinds of psychological incidents are on the rise. So this sounds very good. You've mentioned the word optimism a few times, and I'm wondering if you could give kind of an overview, a definition of what you mean precisely by resilience, or maybe the resilient mindset that you talk about.
We use the concept of resilient mindset. First of all, it really has to do with how do resilient people, and how we're using the word resilient is these are people who more successfully bounce back from problems or adversity. How do they see the world differently from those who are not resilient? Mindsets, the reason we use that concept, are assumptions you have about yourself and other people, assumptions about your skills. So what we try to do is look at the research and say, how does a resilient person see the world differently from one who is not resilient? What skills do they have that people who are not resilient lack? And the more we understand that, the more we understand the way they see the world and their own skills, the more we understand how they see other people, we felt mindsets can be changed. You can work on your mindset. You can become more resilient. And we then felt the more you could articulate these characteristics, the more you can then help yourself.
Well, once we get past what the characteristics are, I'm wondering, people want to know, well, what's the real purpose for this? Is this, you say, to be successful. Now, success means many things to many people. How are you characterizing success?
Yeah, I'm certainly not characterizing it as some people might, and you know, the money you make or whatever. It's a wonderful question. How does one characterize success? For me, and again, I don't want to sound jargony, it's a person who feels comfortable with himself or herself. They're able to deal with mistakes they make in life. They treat others with great dignity and respect, and they treat themselves with dignity and respect. They live a life in concert with their values. You know, we all should have certain values, and then we have to ask ourselves, are we living our life in concert with this? I believe success is when you're compassionate and you give to others. So you could line up 10 people and ask them what success is. They may give you different reasons, and it's not like it's defined in one place. But this is how I view it based on, you know, my years of clinical experience and looking at some of the research. There's a certain satisfaction and contentment within ourselves, but also, so it's not that we're selfish or narcissistic, we treat others with dignity and respect.
Well, I have to say, with the many times you've been on our show over these years, you do practice what you preach.
Oh,
I always
thank you.
feel like $1 million when you come into our studio. So I don't mind listening to you. You know, you hear people say you should do this and do that, but don't look at how I live. So I thank you for sharing your ideas and your life with our School Talk viewers. There are obstacles, though. We all run up against obstacles toward even reaching this, feeling comfortable with yourself and with others. What are the major obstacles, though, that where people fail?
Yeah. If there weren't obstacles, I could give a talk and everyone go out and totally change their life.
Okay.
One of the main ones is what we talk about in our book, is what we call negative scripts. We are all programmed, if you will, from birth to have certain feelings about ourselves. You know, if we grew up where we didn't feel very good about ourselves, then you're not as confident. So you could have someone like me saying, you know, you should attempt this, or you should attempt this, or you should attempt this, and that person may be sitting there saying, these ideas are great for other people, but I'm never successful or whatever. So we have these messages in our mind that we really have to overcome these negative scripts. Negative scripts are when we say or do or think the same way over and over again, and it doesn't lead to productive results. It doesn't lead to a better life. So it's very important to identify what are those scripts so we can start to change them. Another thing is some people, and I'm smiling to say this, get so excited they hear these ideas and they want to make over their life in a day.
In 10 minutes.
Yeah. I had this man come in and he had gained weight, he was depressed and anxious, and he said, I've read exercise can really help. And I said, yes, you know, it really can. And he says, well, starting tomorrow, and he meant this sincerely, but I left. He said, starting tomorrow, I'm going to start jogging 5 miles a day. And I sort of looked, I said, 5 miles a day? I said, look, I jog. I know how long it took me to build up that way. And one of the problems this touches on is some people do not have clear-cut goals, or if they have clear-cut goals, they don't have really realistic goals in terms of a timeline. So what happens is you rush in to make changes, and then when you don't immediately succeed at these changes because they're very unrealistic, you fall back to old patterns. And so what you have to realize is you have to change the negative scripts, and you have to have realistic goals. And then just one other thing I want to mention.
This is good. This is
one of the main characteristics of resilient people is they focus on what they have control over rather than what they have no control over. A lot of people have written about this. But in my practice, and just in the workshops I've given, I meet more people who are looking for their happiness by someone else changing first. So they say to me, I would be resilient if only my boss was nicer. I would be this. One of my all-time favorite examples, I was doing marital therapy, and a wife sitting there with her husband said, my marriage would be good if only I wasn't married to him. And it's like, and part of it, what she was saying is he should change first. One of the greatest obstacles to being resilient is when you are looking for then your happiness by someone else changing first. And one of the questions I always say to people is, list 3 things in your current life you would like to see changed, and then next to it put down whether someone else has to change first for you to realize that. And if someone else has to change first, get rid of it. I mean, you know, too many people really do look for their happiness by others changing first. You have to feel empowered that you have to make the changes.
This is such good psychology, and you speak of these people who are able to do this. You call them stress-hardy people.
Yes.
And I was captured by that phrase, and I wonder if you could talk about what you mean by becoming stress-hardy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I became fascinated by this, and I didn't coin the term. There's a researcher at Columbia University, Suzanne Cabasa, and she basically raised, to paraphrase her, an intriguing question. Why is it, like some people even working in the same positions, why is it that some are better able to deal with stress than others? And what she said is there are certain characteristics, it really ties to the research on resilience, certain characteristics that stress-hardy people have that those who are not stress-hardy lack. She called it, Nadja, a stress-hardy personality. I always think personalities are hard to change, so in my writings I call it a stress-hardy mindset. And she said there are three main characteristics, and I must tell you, this was one theory I actually applied to myself. You know how we read theories of psychology that apply to our husbands, our wives, our children, but not us, we're normal.
Us.
And I have found it extremely helpful. And I call it the 3 C's because the first letter of each of the words of the mindset begin with the letter C. And should I?
Oh, please,
oh, okay.
yes, I'm dying to know.
Okay. One, and they're all common sense, but we have to work on it. 1 C is commitment. She found people are less stressed when they feel a genuine purpose or passion for why they do what they do.
I understand that one.
Yes. I mean, if you go into work each day and say, oh my God, I got to go to work. Oh my God, let's say you're a teacher, I've got to see these kids. Oh my, you know, this and this. You're really burning out. What we have to think about is, why did we become a teacher? Why did we do this? You know, what was our passion? And I'm not saying it's easy to recapture, but if you don't stop to think about it, it's just drudgery. So you want to find a purpose to why you're living your life. The second C is challenge. Stress-hardy people, when difficult situations come up, instead of saying, oh my heavens, another burden, they'll actually, their mindset is, can I learn something from this? I know it's not going to be easy, but can I learn something? So instead of permitting themselves to have a negative thought, they have a positive thought. And the third C is what we were talking about before, is control. I call it personal control. This was the major part. They feel a sense of control of what is going on in their life. They focus on what they have control over, rather than looking at what they don't. And Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, he put it so beautifully in one of his books where he said, even in a concentration camp, there were prisoners who gave away their last morsels of food. And he says it so poignantly, he said, what they demonstrated was dignity, and what they demonstrated was the last of the human freedoms, to choose your attitude in any situation. And he basically said, if you could choose to be kind and generous, even in hell, basically, I mean, a concentration camp, that is the true mark of a stress-hardy personality and a dignified person.
Thank you. We're going to take a break, but what a beautiful thought to break on here for us to reflect for just a moment. When we come back, though, we're going to get some realistic tips about communication. Whether you're a teacher or a business person, we all have to communicate. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Mr. Buffundo, the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed, our company's new president.
Wow. That reminds me of how President William Henry Harrison, 9th American president, caught a cold on Inauguration Day. 31 days later, boom, dead. Yeah, completely dead. 6 feet under.
It's fun to know history. Find curious facts from America's past at loc.gov, the Library of Congress website.
Dr. Brooks, you know, I don't usually do book reviews or recommend books, but I have to say, this book, I'm going to hold it up. I hope the camera can pick it up. The Power of Resilience by Dr. Sam Goldstein and Dr. Robert Brooks. The reason I really like this book, and I've read all of your books on the power of resilience, all the way back to Sex Education in 1984,
wow.
I think.
Yes.
But all of your books have been so wonderful for teachers
Thank
and
you.
parents. But this one is good for anybody, and I had so much fun doing the exercises in the back. It's like if you don't have time to go to a psychologist, use what's in the back and focus and reflect on these questions.
Well, we put them in on purpose for people to reflect upon in the privacy of their own rooms
oh,
or whatever.
Wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful. And again, we were talking about the stress-hardy people and the various things you've talked about. Underlying almost all your books, there's a theme running through all of them, and I think you call it empathy. So do you want to speak on that for a minute?
Well, you're right. I mean, in our books about resilience in children and my book about, you know, the self-esteem teacher about schools, and now this one, we feel one of the basic characteristics of successful people is to be empathic, to put yourself inside the shoes of another person and see the world through their eyes. To really practice, what that means is to practice the golden rule and say to yourself, I will never say to another person what I would now want said to me, and that's why you put yourself in the shoes of another person. People would be so much more successful in life and their relationships if they were empathic, if they considered the viewpoint of the other person. Considering a viewpoint doesn't mean you agree with the other person, but it means that you're really listening. And empathic people, for me, ask two basic questions in almost every interaction. In anything I say or do, what do I hope to accomplish? And am I saying or doing it in a way where this person will really be able to hear me? See, some people know what they want to accomplish. A parent wants to motivate their kid, but they scream and yell and say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen, rather than saying, how can I help motivate my son or daughter in a way where they will listen to me? If I yell at them, they're not going to listen to me. How can I motivate them? How can I sit down with them? So empathy is so powerful, and Daniel Goleman, in his wonderful work about emotional intelligence, says one of the components of emotional intelligence, or you know, how we're successful in life basically, is empathy.
Well, that leads into my next question very carefully and very beautifully, because I want to know about some tips that you have for communicating. Obviously, this is the underlying theme or factor supporting all communication, but would you give us some tips for effective communication?
Right. Well, one of the first I always say is, of course, you have to actively listen and you try to understand what the other person is saying before you bring in all of your own agenda. I mean, that's given. A very important thing where I see a lot of failure at times is to really validate what the other person is saying. Validation does not mean you agree, but you validate. You basically say, I can hear you. So someone brings up a view you don't agree with, instead of getting angry, you could actually say to the person, you know, I really understand what you're trying to say, but I do have some disagreement with you. Or sometimes even loving people. A mother once said to me that when her son said to her that he's ugly and dumb, and he kept saying it, the natural reaction was what she did. No, you're not, honey. And he got angrier. And at one of my workshops, she brought that up, and I said he got angry because no one wants to be told how they should feel. And she said, but I should just accept that? I said, no, you should validate it. Instead, you could have said, I'm so glad you could tell me how you feel. Now that I know, we could try to figure out what will help you to feel better. And I told this mother, I said, imagine if you came to me and said you were depressed, and I said, there's no reason for you to be. Would you feel I was really listening? If people could truly validate and hear what others are saying, it would be so vital. And the last thing is we have to be very careful. There are some charged words that could totally cut off communication. Things like always. You're always a pain. Or never. You never do anything nice. Some words already, communication is going to be really destroyed, effective communication. So if we keep empathy in mind, we could say, what am I trying to communicate? Am I doing it in a way where this person will be able to hear and respond to me positively?
I wish I had talked with you last week. I'm the director of our Sunday school, where everybody's supposed to be so nice. We're all committed to doing good work. But somebody was very angry about these parents who never bring their children, and why don't they? And you know, I hope I handled it well, but I wish I'd talked with you. But last week I would have done better, I'm sure, about just validating his you know, concerns and anger, and then just going on with it to talk about it.
Look, I could easily describe it to you here.
But it's
but in the
good to
heat
know.
of the moment, right?
Yes.
As long as we have God, but in the heat of the moment, we're all going to fall at times.
At times, yeah. Well, you talk about two more keys that seem to me to be very connected. One you call, you're talking about it, but I'd like you to pointedly talk about accepting oneself and others, making connections, showing compassion. Now, you've talked about seeing, you know, the other person's point of view, and again, not validating it, but not agreeing with it. But when you say accepting others and yourself, and making connections, showing compassion, can you kind of
Sure.
put something around that?
Those are actually two different chapters in the book, and very important ones. Accepting oneself is, look, we all have different strengths, we all have different vulnerabilities. So many people try to be people they cannot be. And they don't live also, some people don't live their lives, something I said before, in concert with their values. So they're not accepting themselves. They're always looking at what they don't have rather than what they do have, and have to realize that we are all different, and we all going to have our different goals that we want to reach. The same is true of accepting others. You know, we could find fault in everyone. But we have to realize we are all different, and finding fault and trying to change everyone so we will be happier is not going to work. And living a life in concert with one's values, I often ask people, and some of the questions are in the book, what is most important to you in life? And I'll have people say, my marriage or my children or this, and then I'll say, how much time? And it's not just an issue of quantity, but how much time do you spend on this? And sometimes you see why people are burned out. They'll list their church activities, they'll list their marriage, family, all this, and then you find out they're spending almost no time on that. They're spending 95% of their time in work, and they're not even thrilled about work, and then they'll say to me, oh, maybe that's why I'm depressed or anxious. Okay. So one has to really have a clear idea, what are my values? Am I living it? The second part is very important. There is research to show from childhood to adulthood, one of the things that most helps people to feel that resilient is when they feel they are making a positive difference in the lives of others. I talked a lot about this in my book on kids, but when I was doing research for this book, elderly people who are actively involved in helping others, even if some of their other habits are not great, they're smoking, they're eating too much, live longer lives. I mean, there's a whole body of research which more and more is showing the act of giving to others brings meaning to our own lives. The act of charitable activities brings meaning to our own lives. So being compassionate is very important, and that's why in the book we talk about make sure you have, if you want to be resilient, activities in your life where you are giving to others, not just to get something back. The main benefit will be, if you get something back, is the feeling that because I'm on this earth is a better place. And it's at any age, and it's one of the most important things in resilience.
It really, it just comes to me, some of the teaching we all had as children, that now all this research is proving it is more blessed to give,
right?
and the good things that we learn from our religions and from good people. And now all this research is capsulizing it so that we can really understand it and grab hold of it. I think that's what the book does. It did for me anyway.
Thank you.
And you did talk, though, about the fact that we do fail occasionally. We all, especially in the heat of the moment. So how do we deal with when we have goofed, we failed, we have mistakes? How do we deal with those?
You're right. Again, one of the hallmarks of resilience, we're talking about several, is resilient people realize we're going to fall on our face. What can we learn from this? People who are not resilient feel every mistake is like a rock around their neck, which weighs them down more and more and more. What we can do is, first of all, just accept the fact. We are all going to make mistakes and fail. It's a mindset again. And when we make mistakes, we have to ask ourselves, what can we learn from this? Maybe we have to have different expectations, different strategies to reach a goal. And we can't just become a martyr. See, here I am again, I'm failing again. It's not easy. But what I learned is, giving a lot of workshops, at times something will come out of your mouth, and you know, where you use the wrong word. I used to get upset, and now, you know what I do? I just kid about it.
Yeah, good.
I just kid. I'll just say, did I really say that? And it relaxes the audience as well.
What a good example, excuse me for interrupting you, but what a good example of somebody, you, who put so many wonderful concepts in clear words. To hear you say that is probably encouraging to our viewers and me. Before our time runs out, I noticed in your book that you considered the real cornerstone of resilience is self-discipline, self-control. So before our time runs away, I really want you to say, why is that the cornerstone?
Well, probably all of them are cornerstones in one sense, but why we especially had that chapter, we always have it in books about raising kids. Why I wanted it there is, again, if you look at Daniel Goleman, he says one of the cornerstones of emotional intelligence is self-discipline or self-control. And the best way I could describe it, who wants to be with a person who is unpredictable, abrasive, loses control or whatever? Self-discipline means you think before you act, you consider other people, that, you know, you're much more considerate. You plan. Planning is one of the most important things also in resilience. You plan different strategies. You're a problem solver. So under self-discipline goes problem solving, decision making, treating others with kindness, you know, thinking before you act, thinking of the consequences, taking personal responsibility. A self-disciplined person recognizes you can't blame others. You have to take responsibility. You can't say it's the other person's fault, or I always love it, it wasn't me. And I always say, it wasn't? Who was it then? And so, just like we emphasize self-discipline being a very important part of resilience in children, it's really just as important in adults to lead a disciplined life. This doesn't mean, by the way, a rigid life at all.
I'm glad
because I want to bring the,
I was
just
going to ask you
emphasize
about
this.
that.
It means being a self-disciplined person is flexible. They can change things. It doesn't mean, oh, you know, every little thing has to be followed in a certain way. But it really implies, for me, it ties together all of the others with empathy and compassion, thoughtfulness, and problem solving, which are key dimensions of a resilient mindset.
Well, what a wonderful note to end on. I thank you. We couldn't have timed this better, Dr. Brooks.
You always do. Great timing there.
Well, thank you so much. I've just learned so much, and I'm sure our viewers have too.
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. There were so many good thoughts and concepts in Dr. Brooks' speech and talk here and in his book. Some of the basic thoughts that I found very encouraging, and they're captured in great style in the book, by the way, is don't wait for another to change first so that you can achieve your goal in happiness. And also the familiar serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Great psychology, and of course it's great school talk.
Join the discussion. Send your comments to schooltalk@bridgew.edu.